All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're exploring the incredible step-by-step biological mechanism that literally drives the staggering diversity of life on Earth. We hear the word evolution all the time, right? But the actual mechanical process of how it happens, well, it's often deeply misunderstood. So we're going to break down the exact recipe for evolution. We'll look at the science that explains how a single common ancestor could eventually branch out into, everything from towering redwood trees to peppered moths, and yes, even us.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First up, the myth of evolving. Then, the rules of natural selection, followed by finches and moths. After that, we'll cover Darwin and the evidence, and finally, wrap up with adaptation and biodiversity.
Section 1. The myth of evolving. Busting the need-based change misconception. Let's completely dismantle a super common yet totally incorrect idea about how organisms actually change over time.
Take a look at Lamarckian versus Darwinian evolution. Back in the early 1800s, a naturalist named Lamarck proposed that evolution happened through acquired traits. He figured, hey, if a giraffe lives in a dry area and constantly stretches its neck to reach high leaves, its neck would literally stretch and grow longer over its lifetime, and then it would just pass that longer neck down to its baby. I mean, it kind of makes intuitive sense, right? But it is absolutely wrong. Darwinian evolution shows us that individuals don't evolve just because they choose to adapt or because they need to. You can't just change your genetic code by trying really hard. Instead, evolution happens to entire populations, slowly, over many generations.
Moving to Section 2, Rules of Natural Selection. The step-by-step mechanism of life. Now that we know populations evolve, not individuals, let's look at the 4 essential ingredients for this biological recipe. The very first ingredient? Variation. Think about it. If you look at any population of organisms, they aren't exact clones of each other. Some beetles are green, others are brown. Some giraffes just randomly have slightly longer necks than the rest of the herd. This variation comes from genetic mutations and shuffling that happen entirely by chance, and that's key. These genetic variations don't just pop up because the organism needs them. They are literally just random edits in the genetic code.
Ingredient number 2 is heredity. The absolutely crucial point here is that for natural selection to actually work, these random variations must be heritable, meaning they have to be hardwired into the organism's DNA so they can be passed down to the next generation through egg or sperm cells. If a bird breaks its wing or, say, a human builds massive muscles at the gym, those physical changes aren't getting passed to their babies. Only the variations written in the genes move forward.
So let's mix these ingredients together. We've got variation in traits and the heritability of those traits. Rule number 3 is that nature is harsh. Most populations produce way more offspring than local resources can support, which kicks off fierce competition for food, water, and space. And that brings us to step 4, differential survival and reproduction. Individuals that happen to have inherited traits better suited to their current environment, well, they have a much greater chance of surviving this struggle. Because they survive longer, they reproduce more, passing those advantageous traits on to the next generation. That, right there, is natural selection.
Section 3. Finches and moths. Natural selection and action. It's one thing to hear the rules, but seeing how environments act as selective pressures in the real world is truly mind-blowing.
During his famous voyage on the HMS Beagle, Charles Darwin explored the Galapagos Islands, this remote chain of isolated landmasses, and he found a whole array of finches. We're talking 14 unique species found nowhere else on the planet. But here's the kicker. They all looked like modified versions of a single common finch from the mainland of South America, which was some 600 miles away.
This shows perfectly how natural selection operates by comparative advantage. The variation here was beak shape. So, on an island where the main food source was large, hard seeds, finches that just happened to be born with larger, thicker beaks survived the competition for food. They didn't grow a thick beak because they wanted one, they were just lucky to have the genes for it. And because they didn't starve, they reproduced, passing on those thick beak genes. Meanwhile, on a different island full of tiny insects, birds born with slender, probing beaks won the survival lottery. The environment literally did the selecting.
To see this process happen really rapidly, we can look at the Industrial Revolution in England. The peppered moth naturally had this light-colored, speckled pattern. It made them perfectly camouflaged against lichen-covered tree trunks. Dark-colored variants, the melanic moths, were incredibly rare because, honestly, they stuck out like a sore thumb and got eaten by birds. But then, factories started spewing massive amounts of soot, killing the lichen and turning those tree trunks pitch black. Suddenly, the light-colored moths were glaringly visible, and the rare dark moths, they instantly had the camouflage advantage.
This empirical data from a brilliant biologist named H.B.D. Kettlewell perfectly anchors what we're learning. Back in the 1950s, he ran release and recapture experiments to prove this. Just look at the numbers. In clean, non-industrial woods, birds preyed heavily on the dark moths. He recaptured 14.6% of the light ones, but only 4.7% of the dark ones. But in the soot-stained industrial woods, the tables completely turned. He recaptured over double the amount of dark moths compared to the light ones. The environment directly dictated which inherited trait survived the fierce competition of nature.
Section 4. Darwin and the Evidence. The Discoverer and the Scientific Proof. Let's briefly look at the man who connected all these dots and the overwhelming mountain of evidence behind it.
Darwin wrote that each slight variation, if useful, is preserved by the term natural selection. You know, his true genius wasn't just guessing that species change over time. Actually, other naturalists were already starting to suspect that. His massive contribution was identifying this specific, logical mechanism of natural selection, and then spending decades building up an unbelievable volume of undeniable evidence to back it up before he even published it.
Looking at the timeline, we start with Lamarck's early, flawed guess at evolution in 1801. Then we had the 1830s when a young Darwin is collecting his observations on the beagle. But it wasn't until 1859 that he actually published On the Origin of Species. And wow, the book caused an immediate uproar. Literally every copy sold out on release day. It completely challenged the traditional idea that every creature was independently and perfectly created exactly as it is today.
Today, this theory is universally accepted in science because it is supported by independent, rock-solid pillars of evidence. We have the fossil record, like seeing the ancient dawn horse evolve step by step from a small woodland creature into the long-legged modern horse built for the open plains. We have modern genetics, which proves exactly how mutations create those vital variations. We've got comparative anatomies showing shared traits across vastly different species. And as we just saw with the moths and the Galapagos finches, we have direct observations of it happening in living populations right now.
Section 5. Adaptation and Biodiversity. The results of natural selection over millions of years. Let's tie it all back together.
Through this continuous, multi-generational process, natural selection shapes populations to become exceptionally adapted to their local environments. Remember, an adaptation isn't a clever tool an organism just invents on the fly. It's simply a trait that, by pure statistical reality, allowed its ancestors to survive and leave more offspring than those without it.
If we break this down statistically, natural selection alters trait frequencies in three main ways. First up is stabilizing selection, which trims the extremes and favors the middle ground. Kind of like human birth weight, where being either too small or too large historically lowered a baby's survival chances. Second is directional selection, which pushes a whole population toward one extreme, just like those peppered moths shifting from light to dark. And finally, there's diversifying selection, which favors both extremes at the expense of the middle. Over millions of years, especially when populations get geographically separated, this diversifying selection is actually what breaks one species into two distinct new species.
So, what's the crucial takeaway from this explainer? It's that the staggering diversity of life on our planet, the whole giant branching tree of life, isn't magic. It's simply the unavoidable result of random variation, heredity, and environmental pressures playing out over vast, almost unfathomable stretches of time, slowly filling every empty ecological niche available.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a provocative question to think about. If environments are always shifting, whether it's from climate change or urban development, what new traits is natural selection favoring in the world right now? Because that continuous, silent engine of natural selection, it never stops. It's still shaping life on Earth, including us, at this very moment. Thanks for exploring the brilliant mechanics of life with me.